We want to thank you for joining us on this Friday afternoon for our panel on environmental studies. I myself am very excited about this talk having to do with honey and maple sugar, maple syrup, all things sweet, and excited to have one of our faculty members, Sarah Velarde, on to talk to us.
Yeah, welcome everybody. I see that you all are joining in. My name is Craig Broccoli. I'm the Associate Director of Admissions here at Binghamton. I'm actually based in New York City most of the time for Binghamton, but behind me, this is the Binghamton Nature Preserve.
So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah Velarde from Environmental Studies, and you can take it away.
All right. Well, great. Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Craig. So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today, Friday at 5. I'm really excited to talk to you all about the Environmental Studies program at Binghamton, as well as the work that I do and the classes that I teach there. I think one of the great things about environmental studies at Binghamton is the interdisciplinary nature of it. You can really take classes in such a wide range of topics, but stay on these sort of specialized tracks, so you really come out with a degree that's focused and helpful for your career path. I'll also talk a little bit more in detail, but I think another great feature of environmental studies is just the resources that we have right on campus and in the community. So Craig mentioned the Nature Preserve is his background. So we have this 180-acre nature preserve right on campus that for environmental studies is such a perfect resource for us to be able to explore some of these ecological topics that we talk about in our classes right outside in our backyard. And then a big feature that I try to have in my classes, and really is across the environmental studies curriculum, is having these community engaged experiences. So we have, obviously such a great, strong community here in Binghamton that is really receptive to the university, and we have such great partnerships currently going on and new ones happening. So I'm really excited to give you some more detail about that as well. So to start off, I will share my screen now so you all can see. All right, so as Carrie had mentioned and as was talked about as well, we're going to be sort of talking about the sweet taste of environmental studies because one of the classes that I teach is the Sweet Harvest, Bees and Maple, which was a popular class this year and one that I'm really excited about. But to kind of start off, I have a poll question for you all, which is essentially what brings you here today? So I'll give you all a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds to answer, to learn more about environmental studies program, to learn about maple syrup and honey from the class, or to really learn about some of the interdisciplinary community engaged learning experiences we have at Binghamton. And then of course, all the above. All right, let's see. All right, great. So we have a mix of learning about environmental studies and interdisciplinary nature, and then a bunch saying all the above. So sounds good. So we will definitely touch on all of that. All right, so to jump right in, just kind of an overview of the environmental studies program and major overall. So you can get 2 different degrees in environmental studies. You can get the Environmental Science Bachelor of Science, or you can get the Environmental Studies Bachelor of Arts, a BS or a BA. So these are some of the sort of foundational classes that you will see in the BS as well as in the BA. So NBI 101 is actually a class I'm teaching right now, giving a broad overview of environmental science, humans, and the ecological environment. And then there's also 201, which follows up from 101 with a little bit more focus on the physical environment. So we talk more about geology, mineral resources, but then tie that into things like solid waste, hazardous waste, water pollution, air pollution, things like that. And then also Introduction to Environmental Policy is a really popular class for students to take. And then you'll see those 400 level classes. So those are usually your senior year. Environmental planning is usually it's taught like a capstone class in that you and a group will do a group project, usually connected to the community outside of Binghamton or even just within Binghamton University. And then also you can get credit for an internship in environmental studies as well as that NVI 495. And that can be an internship that is, again, outside of the university. We have students who work on farms, who work in policy related things. So there's kind of a wide range of internships you can do. And then within the major, there are what we call specializations or tracks. So depending on, again, if you're doing the BA or the BS, you can sort of follow along in one of these tracks. So we have the ecosystem track, which just as it sounds like would be more focused on taking classes related to ecology, as well as kind of the earth sciences, natural resources, environmental chemistry. And then you'll see we have some that have a little bit more of the policy or social science focus with public policy and law, environmental planning, environmental economics, and ecological anthropology. So obviously this showcases that you will take, again, a wide breadth of classes, some right within environmental studies, as well as some among different departments. So if you were an ecosystem major, you could take classes in Envi as well as in bio. And then just kind of zeroing in more and more here. So these are the diversity of courses that you can take within the major. So these are all considered NVI classes. So again, you can see this top part here. We have some focus on environmental chemistry, GIS, environmental hydrology. GIS now is a really good skill to have for many different professions, specifically in the environmental studies field. So those classes are great to take. Then you'll see these are some of our sort of ecosystem focused classes. These are taught by my colleague, Dr. George Meindl. He teaches, and I love the name of the soils one, Soils, Life and Death Underfoot. And then he also teaches this really cool class called Fungi and Sustainability. And what it is really going out and harvesting fungi and being able to ID all different types of fungi, and then also learn some of the kind of cool processes that fungi help with microremediation and different things like that. And then you'll also see at the bottom here, these are classes that I teach. The top two here, we're starting to grow more of our food sort of food system curriculum in the environmental studies major. So I teach the food policy class, which I'll talk a little bit about at the end. And then I also teach an agricultural biotechnology, science policy, and conflict class. I studied GMO labeling policy and GMOs for my dissertation. So I'm really interested in that subject and enjoy teaching that class. And then the bottom two here, we have a farm, a garden on campus that's run by Dr. Sean Cummings, who is a professor as well. So he teaches farm to table food, which has students actually working at the farm and then working in the dining hall and cooking. So I think it's a really cool class. I hear really good things about it from students. As well as we have an ecological agriculture class, which is really focused on farming and how to do ecological agriculture. And again, a lot of students who take that are students who either want to work on farms, after they graduate, are working on farms currently as summer internships, things like that. So it's another class that gets really, really great reviews. So that leads to one of the features that we have on campus, and that's the BU Nature Preserve. So as we had mentioned earlier, it's about 180 acres. There's tons of walking trails. It's a really beautiful place to be. There's a 200-acre wetland, which provides many resources. And we have a diversity of species. There are birds, we have many different beavers. steward that runs the nature preserve, Dylan Horvath. He knows so much about beavers, and he loves to talk about them if you go on a tour with him. And we also have many different types of amphibians there too. And again, one of the great features about this nature preserve is that tons of classes are able to use it. So my NBI 101 class, we go out to the nature preserve almost every week. It really is what we would call a living laboratory. And another NBI class that is associated with the nature preserve is this NBI 327 Natural History of Nature Preserve, which is taught by the steward Dylan Horvath. So it's a really great resource for us all to have. And for classes that I teach, I definitely use it. So one of the classes that I teach is Ecology of the Northeastern U.S. It is a field-based course, so we are out there almost every week for labs. I think of it sort of like an elevational tour of ecosystems in the Northeast, so we sort of travel throughout ecoregions within the Northeast, and we start at low-lying wetlands and then kind of build our way up to alpine summits. But with being a field-based course, we do a lot of field work. So with that, we do some macroinvertebrate investigations. So that is, where we're going out and basically, taking a net and digging out different critters and seeing what we find. We did a wetland at the nature preserve, and then we also looked at a man-made wetland on campus. So we got to see, kind of compare some of that biotic health. We also do a lot of tree ID. I think and I hope that one of the outcomes of this class is students learn a lot of different trees and how to ID them. So we do a lot of tree ID across campus and in the preserve. And then we also use this app or this tool called IMAP Invasives. So I don't know if any of you have heard of it before. It's a part of the New York Natural Heritage Program and the DEC. But it's essentially an app that has you record where certain invasive species are, that's then uploaded to this huge document. And it's this great form of citizen science. So as all of my students learned how to use this app, learned how to ID all these different invasives, and we went around campus and ID'd them. And then also too, we ID different wildflowers at that with this class as well. So in terms of community engagement for this Northeast Ecology class, we got to work with the City of Binghamton Parks and Recreation. And what they're doing, the Parks and Rec here, is they are doing this tree keeper website, which basically is tracking all of the urban trees in the city of Binghamton. So they're tracking what type of species they are, their size, diameter at breast height, their height, and overall health. So they have a lot of trees to take down this data. So what was fun is that my class got to help collect some of this data. So that's pictures of them there taking some of these DBH measurements, and then they essentially had an iPad that they would be inputting this data that would show up immediately on the map. So I think it was a cool experience for them. We got to be on the local news, so that's always fun. And they got to meet, the director of the Parks Department. They got to meet the city foresters and sort of learn about their jobs and what they do. So we definitely will continue this type of relationship and community engagement moving forward. So then to switch to the Sweet Harvest class and a little bit of background on me. So I did my master's and PhD at SUNY ESF, SUNY School of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse. And then I did a postdoctoral research assistant, which basically is like you're a research assistant after you finish your PhD. So I did a postdoc at the University of Maine, and I got to be on this project that worked with maple syrup producers and beekeepers. So a big part of this project was understanding, how do maple syrup producers and beekeepers make scale management decisions? Are they wanting to increase in size but can't because of certain reasons, or do they want to decrease? Or do they want to stay the same because that's most lucrative? And sort of within this, whole project, we were understanding what are some common challenges that these producers are facing. And then we were also interested in learning how producers share knowledge and learn about these processes overall, as these are pretty distinct practices, and not all beekeepers and producers sort of have this, have it in their family to learn all of this. So this is where I was coming from. I had just spent a little bit over a year working with beekeepers and maple syrup producers, getting to help, you see the bottom here, I'm helping filter some honey into a jar. So I wanted to take what I had learned from this whole postdoc experience and carry that research and that sort of interdisciplinary understanding of these two processes to Binghamton to teach these classes. So that leads into our second poll question, which is looking at this kind of a quiz question, but which state do you think produces the most maple syrup? All right, and they're in. Okay, so nice work. So 41% of you said Vermont. That is the correct answer. So Vermont is first. It's funny, they're actually like by and large first. Oh, and I didn't change to my second poll question, but they're by and large, first and foremost, they've made over 2 million gallons last year. Second is New York though. So the order sort of goes, Vermont is first and then New York is second. New York made about 820,000 gallons. And then Maine is third. They made about 580,000. New Hampshire is actually a little farther behind than it used to be, but Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania actually make a little bit more, and then New Hampshire is next. Okay, great. So just some basics on maple syrup. Maybe some of you know this, maybe some of you make maple syrup on your own. So first and foremost, for maple syrup, you need maple trees. So right in the corner here, this is a sugar maple, and you can tell that it's, you can tell it's a sugar maple. How I usually idea is because you have this U here, sugar for the U. You can also tap red maples, but they are, you can also tap red maples. They're, some would say just as good, some would say almost as good as sugar maples for getting syrup. The way that you ID a red maple is that this would be a sharper V. So sometimes the way that I remember, which sometimes these get so convoluted, but red is, V is sharp, and sharp, you can cut yourself, blood is red. So maybe that's a way to remember, but it sometimes works. So you need these, in order for the syrup to run, you essentially need freezing nights and warm days. That creates that pressure change. And really what you're collecting is sap, first and foremost, right? Like you don't get syrup straight out of the tree. So sap is a combination of sucrose, glucose, inorganic salts, amino acids, proteins, and water. And sap is really mostly water. So the concentration of sucrose in sap is about 2 to 3%. You can see it in here. When you actually collect it from a tree, it almost looks like water. You can hardly really see a difference. And even if you taste it, sometimes you can taste a little bit of sort of a mineral or sweet taste, but overall not significantly. So for every 40 gallons of sap, you can make 1 gallon of syrup. So essentially, what are you doing to do that? You're really just boiling and evaporating the water off. So making maple syrup does take a pretty long time. Again, you got to get 40 to 1 here. So this is a picture of an evaporator here. And again, really what you're doing is you have logs in here. So you have fire right below here, and then the sap is on this flat pan, and then you're have that heat going, so really all your water is coming off. And finished syrup is 66 to 67% sugar. That's kind of what it needs to be by FDA standards. So you're getting down from that 2 to 3% to 66 to 67, and that's essentially how you get maple syrup. So for this class, with community engagement tied to maple, so we actually were able to tap trees on campus. So these are pictures of my students here doing some tapping. So you can sort of see it's kind of small. So this is Logan, he's tapped in, there's a tap right in the tree, and then you hook up this tube, this sort of plastic tubing that goes right into the bucket, and the sap will just drip in. So we collected for about 3 to 4 weeks or so from February to March. And then we were even able to boil on campus. So we had our own evaporator and we set it up by the art building. And we got to really make some syrup on campus. Also, as part of the class, we ran different sorts of experiments. So here's a picture of 2 of my students. They're using a refractometer here. So they're putting drops of sap on that refractometer, and that can tell them how much sugar is in that sap. So we ran different sorts of experiments. The students came up with them all on their own. They actually had one just for fun, was, you know, there's studies that show if you play music that plants will grow faster. So we did one for fun of playing music at a certain tree and then seeing if the sap would run any faster, if it would be any sweeter. But we also did ones looking at DBH, or the size of the tree, in relationship to the sap and syrup, the sap that was produced. And then of course we also got to visit some local maple sugar houses. So here we are at Sugar Creek Maple Farm in Vestal. Again, a big part of this class and other classes that I teach is that and across environmental studies, is really trying to have students, you know, talk with real maple syrup producers to understand sort of what is their experience like, what sorts of challenges are they seeing, and really get to experience the process that they're learning about. So to switch gears now to bees, so kind of a quick overview of bees here. So I don't know if anyone's a beekeeper out there, but essentially with honeybees, you have 3 types of bees. You have your queen, your drone, and your worker. So obviously you can tell your queen is your largest. Essentially, a queen becomes a queen based off of the food that is fed to her. So it's called royal jelly, but basically the worker bees will feed a particular egg and larva that royal jelly, and then they will develop into a queen. And the queen's main job, and I say job, which is kind of anthropomorphizing the bee, but their main job is to lay eggs. That's ultimately what the queen does, is it lays eggs in the hive. Then you also have drones. Drones are the male bee, and their only job is to mate with the queen. So it could be this queen, it could be queens from other hives, but essentially the queen bee goes on a mating flight. She mates with a bunch of different drones, and then she comes back and lays all those eggs. So the queen can also lay eggs that are unfertilized. So a fertilized egg leads to a worker, and an unfertilized egg leads to a drone. And then last but not least, you have the worker bee. They are the female member of the hive, and they basically do everything. You can see here they build comb, they make honey, they fan their wings to cool off the hive, they collect pollen and nectar, they guard the entrance of the hive, they take care of the queen. So that's sort of the breakdown of the 3 types of bees within a honeybee colony. So then thinking about honey, of course, you're thinking about, you know, what do we start with to get honey? So you start with nectar, right? Because that's what the bees are going out to collect. They're collecting some pollen, of course, sometimes, you know, on purpose because they eat the pollen for food. They get a lot of protein from the pollen, but also sometimes it just gets on them when they're traveling around to different flowers. But they're ultimately going for the nectar. So what exactly is nectar? Everyone think about it for a second. So it's essentially just water and sugar, right? So it's sucrose It's sucrose and water, ultimately. So you can see here, so this essentially is that bee visiting the flower, so it'll be able to suck out some of that nectar, and then this is where they're bringing it back to the hive. So you can even see it's pretty clear here. So this is probably right at the beginning when they had just gotten that nectar. So then what happens, how does nectar essentially turn into honey, is that bees add this enzyme to it, invertase. And it's pretty interesting how they do it, but again, when the bee is going to collect nectar, it's putting it in its stomach, and then when it comes back to the hive, it basically regurgitates that nectar into another bee's mouth. And there's this kind of constant like back and forth of regurgitating this nectar, and when they're regurgitating it, they're adding invertase to it. So eventually it gets deposited into one of these spaces. And then when it has sort of all this invertase, which really just speeds up the breakdown process of the sucrose into fructose and glucose, then the bees will fan the hives that ultimately increase evaporation, and that's where we get our honey. So within this class, we had some community engagement as well. So we got to visit the Cutix Honey Farm, which is in Oxford, New York, just about 45 minutes away from here. They're actually the largest beekeeper in Maine. So we got to learn about a day in the life with them. So there's a picture of us visiting. Oh, and I forgot to mention, of course, a big part of all of these visits and trips are tasting. So we got to also taste some honey, and we got to taste a bunch of maple syrup at Sugar Creek Farm too. And unfortunately, we weren't able to this semester because of things that had happened, but we were planning to visit hives on campus as well. So we do have hives on campus. They're a part of the urban farm and the urban garden. We weren't able to this semester, but hopefully in future ones we will, but visit hives on campus and also visit a local beekeeper's hive, again, to really experience what it's like to work with the bees. So these are actually pictures of when I taught a class at the University of Maine, a similar type class. We went out and visited some hives there. So just switching gears slightly, so those are some of the classes that I'm currently teaching that have some of that community engagement. And then two other classes that I will be teaching in the future that also will have this sort of community engagement is one called Environmental Education and Communication. So for my master's, I have a master's in environmental forest biology, but I worked a lot with environmental educators for my thesis. So I want to have this class that's sort of focused on the basics of environmental education, environmental interpretation. So how you write lesson plans, how you implement these lesson plans, how you do print education, like creating different signs or things like that. So part of this class will have students learning about some of these environmental education curriculums, which are, these are two examples here, Project Learning Tree and Project WET. And then a big part of this class will actually be working with these environmental educator community partners in helping them develop environmental curriculum and then also having them implement it. So the Waterman Conservation Education Center is in Appalachian, New York, so about 15 minutes away. Then we have the Upper Susquehanna Coalition. They work a lot on planting trees and restoration projects to help with pollution issues in the Chesapeake Bay. And then there's the Roberson Museum and Science Center, which is located in downtown Binghamton. So again, students will sort of learn these basics of education and then really be able to work with the community to implement them. And then last but not least, this is a class I'll be teaching in the fall, Food Policy, Safety, Health, and Security. So we'll kind of be going over what is the sort of policy that dictates what we eat, how we eat, what we can eat and have access to, etc. So we'll focus on food safety, issues of nutrition, as well as food access. So we'll talk about the sort of ChooseMyPlate.gov program. We'll talk about SNAP. We're planning to read this interesting book. I'm really excited. It's called The Labor of Lunch. Labor of Lunch, and it's about it's talking about some social justice issues related to lunch workers and problems there, as well as talking about the nutritional aspect of school lunches and how it can be a major form of students' nutrition, and looking at what sort of nutrition are we seeing. And then again, to bring in that community engagement aspect, we will be working with the Binghamton Food Rescue, which is an organization, downtown that works on giving access to areas that need it most. So to kind of close up on some of the examples of the community engagement and interdisciplinary learning in environmental studies, I asked you guys one last poll of what are types of community partnerships you think you would be most excited to be a part of, or what kind of sounds interesting to you for present, maybe future classes. Okay, great. We have kind of a mixed bag. So sounds like community organizations was a popular one, with something like Binghamton Food Rescue, as well as nonprofit, environmental organizations. Great. And then natural resource managers after that, and then farmers, maybe some others, and educators. All right, great. Well, that's what I have for you all today. Thank you very much for your time. I have my email up there. Please feel free to reach out if you have any follow-up questions that we don't get to today, or anything like that. And thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Sarah. So I think what we're going to do now is get into some of our questions. We've got a lot of questions that are coming in on the back, so we're really excited about that. I'm going to start with a couple that are topic related. The first one we want to ask is, what is royal jelly composed of?
Oh, that's a great question. So it's kind of it's a combination of pollen and different forms of nectar, and even in some ways a little bit of honey. So really it's just this kind of protein rich substance that is fed to the queen. And then the idea is it kind of sort of involves epigenetics, where because she has this protein rich diet that no other bees in the hive are getting, then she develops much faster, and then is able to lay eggs unlike the others.
Thanks. And so I know we mentioned the Bew Acres Farm. We can maybe talk about a little bit more about that. How big is it, and how much of the food is used in the dining halls, or where are those allocated?
Yeah, so it's located not that far from campus. It's relatively small. I'm not totally sure of the acreage right off the top of my head, but it's walking distance from the campus. And I know that they do use some of it in the dining hall. I'm not sure how much is used elsewhere. If they do, I don't know if they do the farmers market, or if it's involved with the Binghamton Food Rescue, but I do know that they will use some in the dining hall. But that's, yeah.
Thank you. So we'll switch gears a little bit and ask about a couple questions about what the job market looks like for environmental studies, and how easy is it to get a job in the field, and what kind of job opportunities exist for anyone who's interested in majoring in this field?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are many different, I think, again, what's so great about the environmental studies major is that because it's so interdisciplinary and broad, and you're able to pick up so many different skills, you have many different job opportunities. So right off the bat, working with the Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC, that is definitely the types of jobs that students will go into. There are many, and I talk about this in my Northeast Ecology class. I usually try, so I had guest speakers come in for Northeast Ecology with also the idea of these are potential jobs that you could have at some point. So there are many jobs in invasive species management right now. So there's tons of organizations across New York State and really, I mean, across the country that are invasive species focused. So there are jobs like field managers that you could do something like that. There's ecologist jobs, working for consulting firms that students have gone into. I know students who work on farms, so they got involved in doing that. I know too that students working in policy, so whether that be, you know, directly working for the EPA or again working for, you know, working within the DEC and more on policies type stuff. So there are definitely many different job opportunities. And I have been writing lots of letters of recommendation for students this past couple of months. So that kind of showcases that there are many, many out there.
Great, thank you. So we have another question here about, speaking of opportunities, study abroad opportunities. So do you know what kind of study abroad opportunities might exist for students in environmental science, or you know, just other opportunities to engage outside of the classroom even?
Yeah, so I do know that there are a number of students who are studying abroad. I know one of my students was going to Australia. So I do know that there are opportunities there, and that it's possible to do that as part of your experience here at Binghamton. I think definitely checking out the study abroad program website and everything like that to sort of see details on that would be ideal to really get a picture of where people are going. But I do know that you definitely have that opportunity to do that. And you know, that also brings up the point of internship opportunities. So, you know, you can get credit for specific internships. So that can be, a lot of times students will do summer experiences outside of the classroom and work in New York City, or work, you know, in different parts of New York State for the summer, doing a lot of that field-based type work. There was a lot of jobs I was seeing recently, again, for invasive species management, but also for things like being a boat steward, where you're kind of working on docks and helping people clean off their boat and keeping track of any sort of invasives or things that you see in that way. So I know that there, again, are many opportunities for doing sort of outside of the classroom experiences that are also, you know, outside of structured class time that are very much supported by the department and by the university.
Great. So we're going to switch gears a little bit, and we have some questions more specifically, and for some of the students who might not have been able to join us in the beginning, about the overview of the program. What's the possibility like to get that environmental science degree, a BA versus a BS, and is there an environmental engineering degree or equivalent? I think I know we have a sustainability minor in engineering, so maybe you can talk a little bit about those options.
Yeah, so there are, so the big difference between, you know, a BS and a BA is mostly that you're taking more, it's Bachelor of Science, so you're taking a few more of those science classes. So that's really the big difference between both of those. You're still taking your intro NBI 101, probably NBI 201, classes, and then you'll still end with doing those capstone related projects, as well as, and you could have the option to do some of those internships too, you don't have to. And then for environmental engineering, I don't think there's a specific track for that at this point, but I know that I had a student last semester who was a major in engineering and her minor was in environmental science, so that maybe could be sort of the equivalent. But yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you. So we're going to switch gears a little bit again. So how does Binghamton's environmental major assess and address the issue of climate change, and how does the campus monitor its carbon footprint, and maybe how is the environmental studies program related in that, if at all?
So I know that we are doing work on that right now, because I was just hearing that we're trying to figure out what our carbon sequestration is, because we're trying to figure out essentially what sort of our natural areas, trees, et cetera, that are able to offset that our carbon emissions. So I know that we are taking track, keeping track of that and assessing that and seeing sort of what that, what it turns out to be. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to add into that, because this is exactly where, Binghamton is a young institution, right? 70 years now or so. So we're young compared to other big research institutions, particularly at the R1 level, but that is actually now playing big time into who we are and where we're going, meaning we have about 14,000 undergrads, maybe closer to 10,000 students live on campus. We're a mini city in our own right, with this huge nature preserve and a lot of natural areas there. And how do you balance that flow coming in, the ability for us to compost some of our food and find resources off campus for that? What are we sequestering on campus? I'm glad that we're doing some research on that. Years ago, we had a gigantic coal fire power plant, and that switched over dramatically over to a biomass heating system, district heating, which is one of the best ways to do it for a confined environment there. So there's a lot of opportunities for students and faculty to start looking into this. And I will just touch lightly on this. We have a pretty active student body. They are a driving force. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit after this. But that's always been the culture of campus, and that's always shifted our direction. And part of the reason why we even have a nature preserve and why it hasn't never been built on is because of our students. So another backbone to the Binghamton culture.
Yeah, thanks, Craig. And I know that that's kind of a bouncing off point for where Craig is going to have more of that discussion about sustainability after this as well. So I've got a couple more questions for Sarah, and after we've wrapped up here, Craig is going to share a link with everyone in the chat. You can copy and paste that link and save it, and then kind of talk with Craig exactly more about what we've just been discussing for anyone who would like to stay on. So Sarah, I've got a couple more questions about, one is again about the bees, and I'm actually curious about this as well. How is a particular larva chosen to receive that royal jelly, and kind of, how does that kind of work out in the hive?
Yeah, so that's kind of the amazing sort of feature of honeybees that we're still learning about. But we don't really know how exactly that particular larva is chosen. We learn about, there's this great, amazing researcher, Tom Seeley, whose whole sort of research is about honeybees, and he has done a lot of research on honeybee democracy, and specifically how they choose where they're supposed to be going to find their new hive location, or where they should go to find nectar. So that's still sort of this, we're still sort of learning. So I think, we don't really know exactly kind of how a particular larva is chosen.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up with a couple more questions. So my second to last question is, what types of non-academic experience do the professors have in the environmental program? I know that you mentioned the field research that you have. Maybe you can give some examples of what you and your colleagues are involved in outside the classroom, if at all, and what that kind of looks like for everyone in that department.
Yeah, so I'm trying to think. So we're all involved in research in some way. So outside of the classroom, if you will. So I guess part of it too is being a part of the community as well. So we're all doing research, that's sort of outside of our classroom, sometimes in our classroom. But also we also live here and are part of the community. So even with some respects, like what we're teaching about and these sort of community engaged experiences that I try to have in my classrooms, I obviously try to have them just, outside of the classroom as well. So, you know, being able to volunteer with the Binghamton Food Rescue is something that I've done, and being able to attend beekeeping meetings, because at some point I want to have bees. So I think for the most part that's similar across professors, that we're definitely, you know, not just sort of in our classes and teaching and that's it. We're still definitely connected to the community and the university overall.
Thanks. And then I just want to wrap up with one question. I know you're relatively new to the university, but what made you decide to come to Binghamton and start, you know, a career as a professor here at Binghamton, and, you know, why stay at Binghamton?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I, you know, I went to a SUNY school, and I think SUNY schools are great. So I was really excited about the opportunity to teach at one. I think that Binghamton overall is just a fantastic university in terms of, you know, the rigor of the students here, and just the overall programs is exceptional. And I also really, you know, Binghamton is really nice. Like I really like living here. We had moved from the state of Maine, which is pretty rural. So we kind of weren't sure what to expect moving here. We never lived in Binghamton before. We lived in Syracuse. But it's really nice. It's absolutely beautiful. I don't know how many of you have been to campus, but the campus is beautiful. The town it's a really nice, I think, small, manageable city. So a lot of those reasons were why I wanted to come. Definitely also, you know, just for the students and the work that they do. And also my colleagues and the faculty are wonderful. They're supportive. They care about the students. They care about the other faculty. They care about the university. We have, you know, overall, it's just been a really great experience.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thanks for coming on. I think this has been really great for our students to learn about, not just, you know, the bees and the meal and the sweet things, but also that community engagement and just an overall look at what the department looks like. Again, we just want to thank Sarah for coming on and chatting with us, and for everyone for being here on a Friday afternoon. But I think it's been a really engaging discussion. So thank you again, Sarah, for coming.
Yes, great. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you all for joining.
I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thanks, Sarah. Bye.
Bye.